Hey everyone, it's my pleasure to invite you to our webinar today. I'm Michelle Massey with Operation Parent, and I just want to let you know it's just a beautiful afternoon here in Kentucky, and we are so thankful that you've shared your most precious gift with us, your time. I'm going to take some time and walk you through our features today. Like all of our webinars, we are recording this one. It's going to be sent to you via email in the next 5 hours. For those of you that are joining us live, you will also receive your certificate of attendance within 24 hours. So just give us a little bit of time to process those. It's going to be sent in a separate email from the recording. So just be patient and make sure you double check the email that you registered with. We've got some wonderful handouts lined up for you today. One is called Family Mutual Trust. The other one is Impactful Drug Conversations, as well as a handout on responding to use. And many of you will ask us about if you're able to have today's slide deck. And yes, you can. That's also included in your handouts as well. You can scroll down and download those while you're with us, or you should have also received those from us in an email yesterday. There's going to be a brief survey that's going to pop up directly after the webinar. I promise you it will only take about 2 minutes to complete, and we use every word of those surveys to continue guiding the development of this webinar program. Let me tell you a little bit about Operation Parent. Our mission is to love and support parents by providing real-world information, connection, and most importantly, hope. The title of our webinar today is Parenting in an Addictive World, When to Step In and How to Help. Kyra is our presenter today, and let me tell you a little bit about her. And while I'm introducing you to her, you have an opportunity to do quick registration for our June and our July upcoming webinars. Dr. Bonnie with Stanford Reach Lab is going to teach us how to have real talk with youth about substances and intervention. And then in July, we're going to help youth heal, support through family addiction, trauma, and stress. Trish Luna with Lambie Learns will be joining us for that presentation. Kriya was originally inspired by her own personal journey through teen addiction. Through her 30-year career, she has helped and inspired many people in her roles as a school counselor, adolescent therapist, addictions clinician, and prevention specialist. She partners with parents, schools, and community organizations to help youth avoid and shift self-destructive substance use and other addictive behaviors. She's a sought-after prevention presenter who travels the country supporting educators, parents with prevention resources that definitely work. She's an amazing person and a parent herself, so she understands exactly what we are all going through. Welcome, Kriya.
Thank you, Michelle. What a wonderful introduction. I'm so honored to be here. I have been a huge fan of Operation Parent for years, and they're amazing resources. And it's just dreamy that I get to be on this side of the screen this time. So I served as a school counselor for 22 years in middle and high schools, and including alternative schools for juvenile justice, expelled kids, and dropout risk kids, many of which struggled with what we're going to be talking about today. So I ran substance abuse programs and counseling at a college, and I've been an addictions clinician in adult and adolescent treatment, and I'm a parent and family coach as well. So much of my focus these days is as a prevention specialist, which entails traveling the world or broadcasting around the world, educating parents, school staff, and communities on how to help young people avoid the things we're going to be talking about today. So I'm also a person in recovery myself, as Michelle mentioned, meaning that I was a hot mess of a teen and landed in rehab at 19 with multiple addictions, which is my main inspiration for all that I do. I'm also a mom of a 26-year-old and 2 bonus kids who've been some of my greatest practice ground and teachers on all that I'll be bringing to you. I live in beautiful Asheville, North Carolina, which is a perfect place to engage in my favorite hobbies of performing in visual arts and playing outdoors. So just know that if you are impressed with me today, that I'm available for you, for your school, your organization, to provide professional development, presentations for staff, family, and students, as well as consultation and curriculum development and parent coaching. So just call me. So there are going to be, as we go, for the sake of time, there will be a few of these slides that I'm not going to take time on, but you're going to have a PDF of them, and you can read all the details that we don't cover. But it's important before I begin that we frame this conversation with a few reminders to help us give ourselves like some realistic grace. So I'm going to be presenting best practices, meaning that what the research tells us works best if we did it all perfectly. But as we know, it's easier said than done in the reality of our busy lives. So you get to take all the information I give you, decide what's important and fits your family and your kiddo best, and choose your battles, including making sure that you're not sacrificing your well-being in the process. And also remember that even doing all of this perfectly is proven to reduce the risk of our kids going there, but not prevent it, because we're swimming in an addictive world with unformed brains, and addiction can really kidnap our kids. So I insist that you give yourself compassion and grace if your child is already engaging in these destructive choices, despite your best efforts. So before we get into some material that is going to be a little bit scary, to be honest, I want to reassure you first that the research shows us that having two-way conversations with our kids about all the risky and addictive things makes a huge difference in their avoiding, decreasing, or stopping their engagement in these behaviors and minimizing their negative impacts if they do. So for example, the studies show that 12 to 17-year-olds who reported having one conversation about the risks of risky behaviors, right, of substance use and other addictive things, increase. Hold on. Okay, hold on. You guys, can I take a breath? Can I take a breath? I'm really sorry.
Absolutely. Yes.
Can I take a breath?
Yeah. Yes.
I just need to take a breath. I gotta do a little like meditating for myself. Take a little bit of breath. Yes. Would you kill me to start over?
Not at all.
I mean, for just my part?
Well, Amanda, do you want us to start? Because we don't have ability to do a lot of cut and pasting. So is it better if we just start over from the beginning at this point?
Well, can you just start over from this slide?
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah, good. We can just, I'll write it. Let me write it down so I don't forget.
And I'm so sorry. I feel myself starting to like spin out a little bit, and I just need to breathe and make sure I'm.
Yeah. No, don't stress yourself out about it.
Okay. It's silly because I got this. Okay. Just let me know when I can I just go?
Let me take.
Just remember that you have the power to say, I'm going to let you guys read this slide for the essence of time and move on if you start to feel yourself like needing to give yourself a breath or some time.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I'm going to take Michelle and I back down.
I did that. Good job. Way to self.
I just wanted to
count to 5 in your head and then continue. So you're good.
So before we get into some material that can honestly be pretty scary, I want to reassure you that research shows us that having two-way conversations with our kids about all the risky and addictive things makes a huge difference in their avoiding, decreasing, or stopping their engagement in these behaviors and minimizing their negative impacts. For example, a study showed 12 to 17-year-olds who reported having just one conversation about the risks of substance use with their parents in the past year used 80% less, never mind having 10 or 50 of those conversations. But data also tells us that parents and schools tend to decrease discussions about risky behaviors going into high school years, as the kids, meanwhile, are becoming more curious and pressured and tempted to go there. So we're going to talk later in detail about the art of having these ongoing, impactful dialogues preventatively and when we're intervening in a risky behavior. So the phrase at-risk youth is really a ridiculous one because, as Frances Jensen says in her awesome book, The Teenage Brain, a fantastic book if you haven't read it, they all have jacked up stimulus-seeking adolescent brains that are not yet capable of making mature decisions. And they're growing up in an increasingly addictive world. So let's talk about these two factors. So understanding our kids' brains helps us understand what puts them at risk and how we can help them avoid it. So in adolescence, their brains are ripe for habit forming and addiction like no other time in their lives, which is the good news and the bad news. So here's why. Is that brains grow from the top to the bottom to the top and the back to the front. So the last to form is this frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex right behind the forehead, where all executive functioning takes place. So the structures and the functions of the brain are not done developing until mid to late 20s. And by 9th grade, they still have 30% of the prefrontal cortex left to grow. And by 18, it is 20%. So what this is big picture thinking. So the ability to look at the outcomes of their choices, right? Their possible consequences, or weighing the pros and cons of a decision, or looking at how actions could affect other people, or planning how to get from point A to point B. But it's also where they control their impulses and manage their emotions. So it's like the brakes on their system. The result is hyper rational thinking, believe it or not. I know they do crazy making seemingly insane things, or what child development expert Dan Siegel calls Russian roulette thinking. So an adolescent will look at the likelihood of a consequence happening and weigh it over the seriousness of that consequence. So whether or it's more likely that they get in trouble or get something that they want out of it, basically. So they know that if they get caught drinking in the basement with their friends, or vaping in the school bathroom, or watching porn on their phone, they're going to get crappy consequences that they don't want. But in that moment, they rationalize that it's more likely that they're going to have fun and get acceptance and pleasure or escape, than they are to get busted. So as puberty begins around 5th and 6th grade, they actually have more brain cells than they're ever going to have in their lives. But what they don't have is connections between them. And so in the massive brain remodeling of adolescence, brain cells that fire when they're activated hardwire long term. And if they repeat that exposure or activity, it paves that pathway into adulthood potentially. So this means that what they listen to, watch, engage in, or exposed to and experience, think even, sticks for them. And then dopamine is the reward and motivation neurochemical in the brain that pops off when we do something that our brain registers as helping our survival. So when we go, oh yeah, do that again. So adolescents have a dip in dopamine. So they're naturally craving like thrilling, novel, risky experiences, right? Overcoming challenges and going, oh my gosh, I just did that thing I didn't think I could do. And then when the dopamine pops off, it pops off extra big compared to adulthood. And then it helps to wire those brain connections, encouraging them to do that thing again. Right? So this all solidifies experience into memory for them as well. So this is why, by the way, that song comes on the radio that was like the soundtrack for, our middle or high school, and we feel it all over and we know every single lyric without thinking about it. And then, can't remember anything for the past 30 years, right? We have to repeat it over and over again. So the good feels feel extra good during adolescence, but the feel bads can also feel extra bad. So the amygdala, which serves as the animal brain survival alarm, kind of tucked in the middle, is extra reactive during adolescence. So they over-perceive things as threats to them, which is why, they get upset thinking that you yelled at them when you just gave them a look, right? So any anger, judgment, rejection, or exclusion that their brain perceives that way, they're reactive to, right? And then their stress hormones go off extra big, extra long, and their reproductive hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, are exploding unpredictably, just putting them in a mood roller coaster. So this can result in a steady state of overwhelm in middle and high school years. So put it all together. right? Like a word problem, is that our adolescents have a lot that they want to escape from and turn down. They're literally craving dopamine, not thinking their choices all the way through yet. And then when they find something that works to bring them good feels or take away the bad feels, it hardwires attachment to it like no other time. So again, the good news and the bad news is that wiring, because while they're extra at risk, they're also at extra promise, as I say, right? Is that they can develop healthy behaviors and attitudes that will also last a lifetime. So even if our kid is engaging in something unhealthy, they're still malleable enough to reroute things and relearn them, and to have that stick to. So there are factors that place our kids at higher risk of developing addictions of any kind. So when our kids have experienced trauma or ongoing stress, which could be a million things, right? From parents being in conflict to being discriminated against or bullied, to siblings with a health condition, and having addiction run in the family is another huge risk. So, and this is both kind of nature and nurture. So a child can be influenced by watching that happen and the modeling of that, having more access to addictive substances, right? Or just having the additional stress of growing up around addiction that they want to escape from. It's been shown that when older siblings are using or engaging in addictive behaviors, that can be even more influential than when parents do. Even more, hugely more so if the older sibling engages in that behavior with them. And then the genetic predisposition piece places a kid at risk for a certain substance if it kind of runs up the family tree, right? As it was for me and alcohol, is that I inherited the way that I responded favorably to alcohol. But what we now know is that part of what a kid can inherit is the response to a certain, well, let me say that again, is that part of what we can inherit is the neurochemical balance or imbalance in the brain. So we can inherit a deficit in dopamine or in serotonin, which is like the happy chemical, mood chemical in the brain. So we see grandpa had a gambling issue, dad had an issue with porn, mom had an issue shopping, and then your kid is still at higher risk for developing an issue with gaming or marijuana, because what everybody's been seeking is to up their neurochemicals and feel normal this whole time. And whatever worked for that, they stuck to. So our kids who have challenges with social skills and making or keeping friends, or trouble, feeling like they fit in, are also more vulnerable to peer influences, right? And attaching to anything that helps them feel just more socially confident. And then kids that struggle with a mood disorder or other mental health challenges, way more likely to attach to something that makes them feel even temporarily better or normal, right? Which again was my case with alcohol and magically soothing my anxiety. High impulsivity is one of the highest risk factors for problematic use of anything. So something that we really want to step in on as soon as possible when that starts to show up. So research shows that kids with ADHD are 2 to 3 times as likely to develop substance use or gaming disorders. And our neurodiverse kids, all of them. So kids with learning challenges and those identified as gifted, as much as I hate that term, or higher IQ are also at higher risk, which can be due to processing issues, higher impulsivity, or more sensitivity, stress, and overwhelm, and a stronger desire to want acceptance when our kids feel different. Our kids whose bodies mature early tend to attract and be attracted to more mature content and people. So ideally, we address all of this proactively to prevent use. But if we find out that these factors are behind why our kids are going there, then they become factors that we want to address, right, to help them steer away from these behaviors. So let's talk about the addictive forces, all these things that are pushing and pulling on our kids to go into these destructive directions. And keep breathing through this part, because this is where it can be difficult. So addictive options that are expanding, and getting more dangerous for our kids. So eating disorders are not new, but they're on the rise, with 11% of high schoolers right now estimated as having a diagnosable eating disorder. 1 in 5 women are likely to develop one by 25, and we're seeing that expanding with boys and kids of color. Self-harm is about 1 in 5 high schoolers reports having engaged in intentional self-harm as a coping mechanism. For some, that's experimental. They never do it again. And then for others, it becomes a full-blown entrenched addiction that gets increasingly severe and really hard to stop. There's been about a 50% increase in self-harm in the past 10 years. That is most often involving cutting themselves, but it can be burning, pinching. And I had an issue with picking. 3 times as many girls engage in this, and then higher rates of lesbian, gay, and bisexual kids. And it's on the rise for boys and kids of color as well. Then we have all things screens. And our current stats are that our 8 to 12-year-olds are spending an average of 6 hours on screens a day. And that doesn't count what their school-related screen engagement. High schoolers are plugged in an average of 9 hours a day. And the material on their screens is getting just progressively faster, shorter, and flashier, right? Popping off more and more dopamine, which leads to a dopamine desensitization in kids. If they're getting nonstop dopamine blasts, it negatively impacts their nervous system and their mood. And just like drugs, they need more and more bigger boosts kind of to get the same stimulation and fun. Phones are essentially, portable dopamine pumps, right? And social media is very well-designed addictive experience. They use gambling psychology, of the unpredictable rewards, and then intentionally prey on our adolescents' vulnerabilities, right? Like their desires to belong and be accepted, and appearance insecurities. Gaming, about 1 out of 10 kids who play video or computer games are doing it addictively. We know the more a kid games, the more we see ADHD-like symptomology, and particularly with violent games, we see less emotional control, more aggressive behavior and tolerance of it, and trouble with memory. Average age of porn exposure is now about 12 years old. I suspect it's gone even lower than that post-pandemic. 90% of kids will see porn by 16. And unfiltered internet, by the way, is 27% pornographic. The top site itself gets more traffic than Netflix, Amazon, and X combined. And much of mainstream porn in violence is eroticized, right? And there's a very clear links being made to sexual and physical violence and negative body image for all genders people. We're seeing increases in addiction and erectile dysfunction to a point that it's been referred to as a public health crisis for our young men right now. And we see our lesbian, gay, bisexual, TQ kids having a higher exposure as they seek out sex ed for themselves. And I'm seeing kids develop addictive relationships with sexually charged communications. So 1 in 5 teens have sent or posted a nude or semi-nude picture, and that rate has tripled for 9 to 12-year-olds, y'all, in the past 5 years. 1 out of 3 kids say they have received one. And I have worked with dozens of kids as young as 5th grade, who've gotten attached to sort of the rush of sexually charged online interactions with people that we know, are usually strangers. And then there's gambling, which has had a sharp rise in youth gambling and gambling problems as sports betting and online casinos have popped up and been legalized, particularly among boys. So about 60 to 80%, depending upon the survey, of high schoolers report gambling activities in the past year. That's way more than most parents realize. And 70% of high schoolers say they've seen ads for sports betting in the last week. 14% are reporting problem gambling right now. And just keep in mind that practices like trading skins in Fortnite is gambling behavior. It falls into that category. So addictive pressures are intensifying for our kiddos. And if we're talking about drugs, they're getting stronger, more appealing, and easier to conceal for our kids, right? The most popular vapes for teens contain about 700 cigarettes worth of nicotine, and fruity cocktails in a can and spiked childhood drinks, right? Like lemonade and soda can be 3 times stronger than like your average Budweiser beer. Marijuana concentrates being vaped or edibles can be 90 times stronger than the pot of the 70s. And counterfeit prescription pills, unfortunately, can contain enough fentanyl in one to kill a kid. So there are vapes that can play games and come with collector's cards that look like highlighters, key fobs, inhalers, hoodie strings, right? And nicotine pouches that dissolves in their mouth, right? So they can easily get it by us in schools or parents. And all are being peddled by social media influencers, and beyond drugs, right? Kids can also use phones, social media, gaming, porn, shopping, gambling, right? Almost anywhere now, right? And all of those are being designed to be faster and louder and more graphic and youth appealing and dopamine activating. So our kids are swimming in online messages and pressures, encouraging them to not only use substances, but engage in all the other things I just talked about, and wiring perceptions and attitudes in their malleable brains every time they're exposed to that. And this is often happening in youth online spaces that us adults aren't plugged into and seeing, and don't even think to be monitoring. For example, there's increasing pornographic content being plugged into Spotify and Roblox and even YouTube Kids. They're putting it in there in the shape of cartoons. It's gross. And then we have American culture, especially youth culture, right? That happiness and worth are based on appearance and on how many likes and followers you have. I see a lot of kids that get their worth from that. And the idea that just more is better. So the impact of all this is that these forces, of all these things strongly impacting our kids, it's affecting their mental health and their choices. And studies like the ABCD study, I encourage you to look it up, the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, are showing us that youth screen use is changing their brains and leading to a decrease in imagination, creativity, problem solving, patience, an inability to delay gratification, to tolerate distress, and to entertain themselves. And those last few things are literally the recipe, for addiction. We know the more that a kid is on screens, the more likely they are to engage in drug use or disordered eating or self-harm, or to be experiencing mood disorders or suicidality. And we're seeing youth being more disconnected from adults than ever as a result. Also, again, of screen use, is we're often consuming different media than our kids, which means that they're not only living in different worlds than us, but the adults in their families and and in their lives aren't their main sources of information, values, and guidance anymore. It's whoever's on the other side of this, like co-parenting our kid, the influencers influencing our kids. We know that use is starting earlier of all of these things, again, that I mentioned, and that research shows us that the higher likelihood or the younger that a kid gets engages in a behavior or uses a substance, the higher likelihood it is of them developing a problem with it, especially if they're doing it repeatedly. And the worse that those impairments tend to be, just more havoc on the life, harder to change and recover from. And addictions are on the rise, including to substances, but because of the increasing strength and dopaminergic impact or dopamine popping, of all these things I just mentioned. And we're in an unprecedented time where just trying a drug can kill our kids, with about 20 kids a week dying of drug overdoses still, even with them, having gone down a little bit. So, we currently have a youth mental health crisis. So there are rising rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidality in our kids that's being connected to screen use, as well as the, recovering from the pandemic and societal and global stressors that are just bigger than their little coping toolboxes are, right? It's hard enough for me at 54 to handle what's up in their world. Can't imagine being 14 or 16. So these addictive behaviors that we're talking about, they become understandable ways of attempting escape of all of this. So deep breath. So let's talk solutions. What do we do, right, to help our kids steer away and through all of this? So I want to stress the importance of stepping in as early as possible, right? Ideally, as soon as you hear your kids even curious about this stuff, because this is a beautifully ripe moment that gives us an opportunity to help our kids develop, knowledge, attitudes, and skills that can protect and steer them all the way, through adolescence into adulthood, right? And can actually, end up strengthening our relationship if we, do this skillfully, which you're going to be able to do after this webinar. So I've worked with many parents who dismiss their kids drinking or vaping, right? Or watching porn at first, just because they don't want to make a big deal out of it or cause conflict, or it's just a normal, rite of passage. We all did it. We all turned out fine, but many of us did not turn out fine. like this girl right here, right? Especially if we were in the higher risk categories that I mentioned. And again, these substances and forces are way more addictive and dangerous than in our day. And so not stepping in can allow the beginning of a downward spiral that gets harder and harder to intervene in, y'all. And to the adolescent brain, just know that not intervening is perceived by them as us being okay with what they're doing and us not caring about them. And that part's huge. So before we even approach our child, right, and through every step of the intervention process, we want to kind of root down in these 4 C's of response. So care, calm, curiosity, and collaboration. So when we realize our kid is doing something risky, we are likely to be swirling in a combination of intense feelings, right? Like shock, disappointment, self-doubt, betrayal, guilt, embarrassment. What did I do wrong? What are my friends going to think, right? All of which is we often surfaced as anger, comes out as anger in our kid. So first we want to mine down under all those feelings that are honestly more about us, right, than about them, and get clear on our motives by asking ourselves, why is this so important to me? And what we will find is likely it is fear, right? That we're afraid that our kid is going to hurt their beautiful selves and damage their lives, that we do anything to protect and nurture. And right under that is intense love. That this kid is the love of our lives, and we would send or take a bullet for them, without flinching. So let your child know over and over, right, that you're stepping in because you adore them, right? And we also want to ask ourselves, what do I really want here? Which is for our child to want to make healthy, safe, and responsible choices, and to be able to use that to steer themselves through the rest of their lives, not just until they, aren't under our roofs anymore, right? Or hit 18, and to be receptive to our guidance on how to do that. So this will help with our second C, which is staying calm. So if we come at them with anything that registers as an attack to those reactive amygdalas, right, is that they're going to respond by defending themselves with anger or lying or shutting down or tuning us out, right? All of which is the opposite of what we're aiming for here. So we keep on breathing and tapping down into our care and our motives, right? And remember that like timing really does matter. You don't want to attempt a conversation when your kid's under the influence or when either of you is too escalated, to be able to hear each other. So you can say something like, because I love you so much, I have a lot of intense feelings about this, and I want to make sure I respond in a helpful way. So I'd like to take a couple hours and talk about this after dinner. Or I can see, that you're not ready to have a conversation yet, but it's really important that we do because I love you so much again. So let's get some sleep and we can talk about it in the morning, right? And we can also do this, take timeouts as we go, right? Really similar. If either one of us gets escalated and say, I really want to hear you. This is really important. I'd be helpful. It's hard for me because, I got some big feelings. So let's take a minute. So in order to guide our child in a healthier direction, we need to understand why they're engaging in the risky behavior, right? And how they think and feel about it. So instead of preparing our TEDx, chocked full of all of our life lessons and what they've done wrong and need to do differently, we need to approach them with curiosity. So we need to know what's going on inside and outside of them that's leading to their choices. So is it to be liked by certain people or to have fun and relieve boredom, to soothe their anxiety, to feel better about themselves, right? This information is going to be the gold mine that lets us know what steps we need to take, like if we're going to make a difference in our kids' behavior. So our intervention will be most effective if it is a collaborative process. So instead of blazing in and taking over, right, and to do the things for and to our kids, we really want to think about this process as being cooperative with them. And so they are brought into the commitment, right, to make choices that are better for them. So ideally, we want to get on the same page with our co-parents or as well, or anybody that is any significant others that are helping to raise our kids, so that there aren't any holes in that support system that our kids can fall through, right? So we're going to talk a lot more about this in a minute. So I took all of the prevention science, that is out there on what's proven to help our kids avoid addiction to anything, and organized it into this framework for addiction-resistant kids, which also applies to intervening. So I'm going to outline this, and then we're going to deep dive into each one. So often our kids are not informed, or they're misinformed about what they're engaging in. So it can be valuable for them to get accurate information about the risks that these substances or behavior are proven to have on kids like them. And then, knowing that delaying engagement in addictive behavior greatly decreases their chances of developing a problem, attempting to delay further regular use that's what we really want to be putting our time, energy, and other resources in. That's our main aim, right? Which involves establishing expectations, discipline responses, supervision and monitoring, our own modeling, and maintaining open communication. And then helping our kids, get clear on who they want to be and what they believe in are going to be really powerful entry and what they want for themselves, right? Powerful entry points for talking about how risky behaviors can negatively impact them in the ways that they care about. And then if we're going to encourage our kids not to use or use problematically, then they need to have realistic ways to navigate through the pressures that they feel from society, media, peers, even family to engage in these things. And then they need to have alternatives to drugs or social media or gaming, right, that work as well or better in bringing them fun and belonging and confidence and coping strategies. And then wrapped around this is our relationship with our kids, right? If we want our efforts to make an impact, they need to trust us to be reliable sources of information, guidance, and support. So there's an art, first of all, to delivering information in ways that our kids will take seriously and apply for themselves. So we want to make sure that we are staying rooted in research and facts. We can't just grab the headline or the stat that we heard and repeat it as gospel, because they can Google 5 times faster than us, and their hypocrisy meters are on like full blast, like looking for the holes for everything we say, right? So all it takes is one inaccurate piece of information to lose their trust as reliable sources for it. So if we're not sure, say so. It actually earns their respect. And it's a great opportunity to say, you know what, I'm confused about that too. Let's look it up. It's very empowering for them to learn what you just did about their brains, right? So that they understand their high risk for addiction, how substances can and other activities can impact their brain functioning, the science of addiction, how it hijacks everyone's brains. And it takes control, even the smartest people, right? Because no one ever means to get addicted. And why all these dopamine popping things they can involve in, how using them big dopamine pops or frequently puts them at higher risk of addiction and can actually, stunt the growth of their tender noggins. So we have an awful habit as adults of talking to kids about their choices through our lens and not theirs, right? We tend to bring up the consequences to things that we care about, like how something could affect them being a good employee or a parent or going to college. But if that doesn't matter to them, it's going to be irrelevant. Right. So we need to talk to them about how these things could affect what matters to them. Right. And what does matter to them? Is it being a good role model or to their younger sibling, or their athleticism or their freedom, or just not being depressed, or their appearance? Right. So we want to speak to those things. And similarly, we have a tendency to focus on the long-term impacts, like diseases, and things that they can't, like that formaldehyde, the cirrhosis liver in a jar that some of us got in health class. But their adolescent brains can't really grasp or care about things, that they're not experiencing yet, that are that far out for them. So we want to talk about the more immediate consequences that they might experience in everyday life. So how things could affect their sleep and their trust and their brain functioning and their reputations or overdose risks. And my son's number one protective factor was his knowledge of how much addiction he had genetically in the family, right? Which I described from an early age as his having a seed, right? That he could either choose to water or let it wither and die, right? Meaning that his consuming addictive substances or activities regularly in high amounts at an early age, right, could really be putting him at risk. It's important that our kids see like the tragic worst case scenarios of kids like them, so that they can grasp that it can be them who accidentally overdoses or gets suicidal from soaking in, social media messages. So look for examples that reflect them, girls, Black, honor roll, athletes, queer, etc. But just remember that scare tactics can't be the only tool in our toolbox. It didn't work with DARE. It didn't work with the Just Say No campaign. It actually backfired. And they will dismiss us, as I did with the egg in the frying pan, as being overdramatic. So, our kids are swimming in misinformation about dangerous things. So we want to guide them in thinking critically and questioning the agendas and the biases of those sources of information. So is it research-based? Who did they study? Why? What was the agenda of who those researchers were? Did they study kids like you with ADHD or autism? Was it adults or adolescents, right? And part of our trust building is acknowledging that there's all these complexities and hypocrisies in all of this, right? And they ask these great questions, our kids do. So we want to make sure we're validating those. Yes, cannabis is effective for many adults in treating bipolar disorder with fully formed brains, right? And they're using psilocybin and ketamine therapeutically. And yes, there can be positives to social media and to gaming. And yes, these activities and substances can feel good, right? And they still have risks, and they're very different in terms of their impacts on adolescents versus adult brains. So our children essentially have 6 psychosocial needs, as far as I can see it. This is my model. But for one, they are craving, because of that dopamine deficit, thrilling, exciting new experiences and overcoming challenges, fun and excitement. They want to belong like no other time in their lives, to find their tribe, to feel part of something. They're craving independence and control. They have been controlled like their whole lives so far, right? By the time they hit adolescence, and they want a sense of freedom and autonomy and agency in their lives. They are trying to really figure out who they are and feel like they have a sense of worth and value, and then like that person and feel like they're good at something. And then they just don't want to be stressed, and stressed and distressed. And the bottom line is they're going to choose what is convenient for them and what works. I grew up over a bar and a restaurant, so I ended up in rehab at 19 with an eating disorder and alcoholism because I didn't have enough alternatives to meet those needs for myself, right? So going back to our curiosity, it's crucial that we understand which of these needs they are attempting to meet with their behavior, so that our interventions involve partnering with them to find activities, outlets, strategies to meet these needs in healthier ways. And if you don't address the underlying needs, what happens is a kid may reel back the risky behavior you're concerned about, and then they're left with a hole, right? That something else fits in and becomes a new addictive behavior. So then it becomes like a whack-a-mole, right? With our kid just hopping from one addiction to the next, potentially for a lifetime. So these are a great question to ask our kid is what is this behavior, giving you that you want? What is it taking away that you don't want, right? We can also, help our kids see where their attempts to meet their needs may be backfiring, or could start if they continue to use, right, to backfire. For example, right, they get on social media to de-stress and it makes them more anxious, or they were vaping to gain cool points and acceptance, and now they have reputations that they hate, right? So and make sure, as we, with all conversations, we want to give them a chance to offer up their insights right before we offer up our observations. And then, we partner with them to brainstorm ideas and, for how we can help them access those, those alternatives. So the foundation of everything we're about to talk about starts in this almighty family communication equation. So first we need to establish a norm that this is just what our family does. We talk about all the confusing, scary, cringy things, right? So we say, so you might think that my whole mission as a parent is to control you and suck all the joy out of your life. But the truth is that we actually have the same goal here, sister, right? Is it for you to get increasing freedom and independence and unfurl your wings and thrive out there in the world. actually, we can't wait for you to have freedom because then we get it. And because worrying about you and supervising and monitoring you is exhausting. But it's a complicated, dangerous world out there. So if we are going to get up, out of your grill and take the bars off the windows, right, then we need to trust that you are making healthy, safe, responsible decisions no matter where you are, who's there, and what's going down. And the only way for us to trust your choices is to know, what your thoughts and feelings and wonderings are on all this stuff, what you're experiencing and exposed to, and what you're doing to steer through it, and what you would do to steer through it, what the lines are that you have for yourself that you refuse to cross, what guidelines you manage yourself with. So in this equation, this is really crucial. Trust is a two-way street, y'all. So it's not just about us trusting them. And it can feel really vulnerable and risky to our kids to be open with us. So it's also about us earning their trust. So let's talk about how we do this. So here's what I've learned from decades of interactions with middle and high schoolers about what us adults need to do on our end to get our kids to trust us and open up honestly about drugs and other just kind of like cringy, difficult topics, especially where we're in that trust strengthening phase after, following risky behavior. So back to being curious. In order to understand what our kids are thinking and feeling and experiencing and doing, we want to use open-ended questions, right? Beginning with how and what, which encourages more discussion than ones that they can just shut down with a yes or a no or a meh. It is a word, MEH. So how was the party? What kind of ads do you see for online gambling? What impact do you see social media having on people's mental health versus was the party fun? Do you see ads for gambling, right? Be careful not to rapid fire these, by the way, because that could also feel like an interrogation, if we're hammering them with questions. So if they don't respond right away, it's okay to just sort of leave it to breathe and say, okay, well, I'd love to hear more. I'm really curious about it. So one of our worst adult habits, we got a lot of them, but that creates shutdown in our tendency is our tendency to talk at our kids instead of talk with them. So if we're talking more than 50% of the time, it's probably not a conversation. We're likely lecturing, trying to entertain them, share our stories or our opinions, proving how wise and right we are, how wrong they are, right? So when our kid actually opens up to us, we need to shut our mouths and listen. So when I lay this communication equation down to a family, every kid goes, heck no. Like if I were to share what I am exposed to and what I'm offered and what my friends are starting to do, they would freak out and never let me out of the house. So it only takes one perceived freak out, right? Like perceived to them to lose their trust as in us as being a safe source of guidance and support on these issues. So, and some kids, they're designed to test, how much they can trust us as a sounding board by being provocative. So remember our skills for taking a breath, rooting down in our care and calm, right, through these conversations. So this includes it when they say that wiggity whack thing that is inaccurate, shocking, or scary, right? In these moments, we work extra hard to replace our judgment, right? Our urge to say something sarcastic or to say, that's ridiculous. How the hell could you possibly think that? Or, oh, that's brilliant. Good luck with that. Is that instead, right? We put ourselves in their place, not as us, as them. So we imagine the messages that they're getting in their worlds and how it's being filtered through their brains. And if we do, it makes sense how they see things. So we can actually validate, express respect for their opinion, right? It makes sense that you think that. I can see why you would feel that way. And it doesn't mean that we are agreeing, because then we get to use our I statements and our almighty and, as I call it, and say, and I have a different opinion, right? Or that scares me because, right? Or I heard this study, right, that said, ... So using the almighty and instead of the big old but, by the way, we keep our big old but out of it, meaning we use a validating statement like, that makes sense that you see it this way. But if we follow it with a but, I think, then it invalidates, it erases the whole first half of our sentence, right? So When we approach our child about their concerning behavior, we avoid triggering extra reactive amygdalas by also saying things like, I noticed, I saw, I heard, and the specifics about what we've observed, instead of accusatory statements that will register as attacks. Like, so we say, like, I noticed that at dinner last night, you had bloodshot eyes, you're laughing at everything, which made me wonder if you might be under the influence of something. Instead of, I know you were high as hell at dinner, or I noticed that when you've been gaming for more than an hour, you seem more short-tempered and snippy versus you are really a jerk after you game. You can think that, say it to your spouse, but not to them. And all of our kids, they do what we're hoping for. And they share situations with us that when they're presented with opportunities to use, that they're also terrified that we are going to go all FBI on them, as one student, said to me, meaning that we kick into interrogation and investigation mode, right? The swinging lights, like, who, when, where, right? And if they feel cornered to narc on their friends, or that you're going to throw a grenade into their social world, they're not going to be honest. They're going to lie and not trust us, right? So just remember that the most important thing is that what your child is experiencing and thinking and feeling and doing. So make it okay for them to anonymously report their concerns, as long as they're, nobody is in danger. And, our kids find it insulting and disempowering when we assume that they don't have the information or the insights, or the ideas. So we want to honor their intelligence by stifling our urge to launch into schooling them and ask, what do you imagine might be the downsides of watching porn or using self-harm to cope? Or what do you know about the difference between smoking weed and vaping a cartridge, right? Also ask before you force advice or your own story. Don't inflict help on them. I have to deal with a similar situation around alcohol at company events all the time. You want to hear how I handle it. Or I got a couple ideas of what you could do the next time all your friends want to, play video games all night at sleepovers, if you're open to hearing them. So an extra counseling tip, magical effect, is if you throw in, only you can decide. I can't tell you how to live your life, right? Only you can decide ultimately, what choices to make for yourself or what to do with this information. So, we'll have a couple of the big conversations when we step in on risky behavior, but we want to maintain ongoing dialogue, right? By not just stop, drop, and roll these conversations, if we want to help our kid continue to make and keep changes. So we organically weave conversations into everyday situations, right? So there are prompts and springboards for discussion everywhere we look, from news stories to, Super Bowl ads to gas stations to music references. So it's okay to drop a comment, to spark things. I heard Snoop is quitting weed because he's a grandfather now. You think he's going to stick to that, right? Or if I was your age, those caffeine drinks that we just saw at the gas station would be really appealing to me. What happens for you when you see those? So I love the drive-by rule, which is, especially if we have a cringe-sensitive kid, which is having these mini maintenance talks in under 5 minutes when you are not looking at each other. So while you're doing things, while you're cooking, walking the dog, fixing the car, shooting baskets, right, can make it feel less threatening to them. So using our own similar experiences and lessons can be very powerful, right? Whether they're from our mistakes and consequences, or somebody close to us, or our healthy decisions, right, that we've made at tough moments, right? It helps a kid feel less judged and trust us more and feel empathized with. But we have to remember how things land in their adolescent brain, right? Any hint of something that was fun, or adventurous, or gave them bonding with others or stories to tell forever, are going to register as desirable to them. It doesn't matter how many broken bones or, feelings were hurt. So keep in mind your intention is discouraging continued risk taking. So explain what your motivations were at the time, right? And the choices you wish you had made now that you know that you didn't have to make them, right? And all the info you have. And finally, it doesn't matter how many times your child has said yes to a risky choice. I guarantee you they are choosing not to do it even more often, right? They are constantly turning down opportunities to go there. So make sure that you recognize that. Right? I can't imagine what it's like being a 16-year-old right now. I know that you are steering through a lot of hard stuff and making and choosing not to do a lot of the things that you could be. And I really respect that. right? When they trust that we know they're a good kid and we're not judging them, they're actually less defensive when we do need to intervene and more cooperative with those interventions. So heaps of research tell us that our kids are more likely to thrive in all the ways, socially, emotionally, academically, and avoid self-destructiveness when parents provide a balance of three things: warmth, firmness, and support. And we call this authoritative parenting. So permissive, or what I call free range parenting, that doesn't set expectations for our kids out of fear of conflict or squashing their spirit, right? It ends up with kids having higher substance use, right? And other addictive behaviors. But on the other end of the spectrum is that kids growing up with authoritarian parents, as we call it, which are very controlling, really protective, tell them what to do, when, and how, and give them no room to roam, that those kids also have higher rates of addiction. So we provide warmth, which sounds like, looks like, every expectation, consequence, and intervention is created and delivered, saturated in openly communicated love. And it's also about science, right? So we state these things are proven to be dangerous and harmful for you. And because we love you insanely, we're going to do everything we can to protect you and help you learn how to steer yourself through this and make good choices. So the second is firmness. So research shows us that kids engage in less substance use and other risky behaviors when we clearly state, we expect you to be healthy, safe, responsible, and considerate with your decisions. And you let them know you're going to step in consistently if they're struggling to do so, right? Because you love them. Thus, you're going to keep on engaging as much as they tell us we have to be, right? So this means that we have to follow up on our word so they trust us, that we will do what we say we will. And again, this expresses care. And support means that we understand the limitations of their developing brains, right? So we need to be their frontal lobes sometimes just to keep them alive. But so we put up scaffolding of monitoring and supervision and boundaries while acting as coaches at the same time. So teaching them what they need to learn to manage themselves, right? And then we pull that scaffolding away as they demonstrate that they can make good decisions without us. So we try to do this proactively, right? To prevent our kids from making risky decisions. But when they do, we bring in consequences designed to continue protecting and guiding them. So about consequences, I actually prefer the term interventions over consequences because consequences are an outcome that happens, while interventions, by definition, intervening is to intentionally become involved in a difficult situation in order to improve it or prevent it from getting worse. That's their whole point, right? That's what we're doing. So as I mentioned earlier, we are seeking collaboration, right, with others helping raise our kids, to provide an interwoven network and collaboration with our child so they're empowered and invested in the process, right? What this sounds like is stifling our lectures, right, and our demands, and first asking them, what impact do they see their actions having on themselves and others, including you, right? What do they need to make safe and healthier choices? What next steps do they think, would help them get what they need? What ideas do they have, for demonstrating to you that they can be safer and more responsible to earn your trust, right? That doesn't mean they direct the whole show, right? I mean, as parents, we get to add our "and" when we have other things that we see as important to put in because of our, fully formed brains and experience. But our interventions are going to then be related directly to addressing why our kids are engaging in this stuff, right? What they're showing and telling us they need to make a different choice. So we have parents have a tendency to take phones, and devices as a consequence for everything, with that old kind of punishment approach of we want to hit them where it hurts so that they won't do it again, just to avoid the pain of it, right? Problem is that doing this does nothing to give them the knowledge and skills to do something else, and just trains them to just not do things on our watch, right? Or be sneakier about it. So if they've done something dangerous with their phone, it makes sense to take their phone to keep them safe, but then they still need tools for how to responsibly use it, right? If they're, vaping to be accepted and have fun with their friends, which is crucial at this age, grounding them from and restricting them from all socializing just intensifies that need. It doesn't address it. They need skills for navigating peer pressure and ways to feel, to socialize, right? And feel better about themselves. So it makes more sense is putting up more. We put the scaffolding back up if we need to. We keep doing that. We step in closer because they're showing us that they need us to. We give them more coaching and education and supervision and monitoring. And then we have more conversations in the ways that we've talked about. So we get their phone passwords, we check their activity, right? We limit what they can do, et cetera, while we're teaching them how to make better decisions on their phone. So we have them bring their friends over. They socialize on our watch, with the doors open and where we can see. So scaffolding also looks like villaging up. It can look like villaging up with your kids' friends' parents, like all get on the same page if they're engaging in risky behaviors together, so that you're kind of a united front on guiding them through this. And then addressing the whys also means that if we realize that what's under our child's behavior is a deeper mental health or emotional need, right? Like anxiety or stress or depression or trauma, or they're having learning or academic challenges or social skills issues, then we need to address those. So this, and we know that these factors place our kid at way higher risk of becoming problematic. So we look for more intensive supports. We may need them. So learning and psychological assessments, or tutoring, or therapy, or holistic doctor, maybe, right? Start with your school counselor. Great place to get some of those questions answered. And we may have to work on ourselves, y'all, sometimes, right? And engage in family counseling with them, so that the part we're working on is strengthening our relationship. And then last of all, when a kid has had some natural consequences, from their behavior, so, they're being called a pervert at school for watching porn on the bus, or they threw up all night long from drinking, or their grades are dropping from gaming, piling more consequences onto that can actually backfire, right? Leading them to feel like stressed and stuck and resentful. So the right moment, the ripe opportunity here is for us to actually help them make use of these consequences, right? So we bust out the 4 C's and ask them what they're experiencing and thinking and feeling about what's going down and what their ideas are for repair and change. So a powerful aspect of our support pillar is our own modeling and congruence with doing what we expect of them. Because our kids they're wiring everything they're exposed to, right? Is that how we talk about and demonstrate our relationship with potentially addictive substances or activities really matters, really sticks for them too. So we need to reflect honestly and humbly on what our relationship is to coffee, alcohol, phones, shopping, food, etc., and what that communicates to our kids. So are we showing them that alcohol is an essential part of socializing or celebrating or relaxing? Or do we normalize or joke about, our physical addiction to coffee, where we need it to wake up and be nice? Or do we laugh about how we stress eat or engage in retail therapy, right? Because remember, those hypocrisy meters, that we will lose our respect and trust if we are expecting something of our kids that we suck at, right? So name it, right? I can get sucked into this thing. It's designed to get all of us, right? I smoke because I started when I was your age, and I don't want you to struggle with addiction like me. But then if you name it, it is crucial that you show them that you are working on changing it too, right? Or you can't expect it of them. So create family norms around these potentially addictive things, like screens that apply to everybody in the household. So they're also firing and wiring the connections about the healthy things that you do. They're watching and wiring it. So what you do to have fun and connect and feel good about ourselves, right? And cope. So share those with your kid, include them in it, teach those things to them. But congruence also means that that we have similar protective guidelines around everything proven harmful, right, to their growing brains and their psyche. So I talk to a lot of parents that in the best of intentions allow their kids to drink or smoke weed in their homes and welcome their friends to join them, with this belief that it's helping them learn to manage it all responsibly while under safe watch, right, which we call social hosting. Problem is this. For one, that is a very confusing message to an adolescent brain. That two is that research has shown that kids who drink alcohol at home, especially in party settings, are way more likely to drink outside the home and drink heavier into adulthood, which we can theorize applies to other substances. To them, approval is approval to a teen brain. They can't process gray areas and nuances yet. And 3 is it's important that laws and child protective services see enabling these behaviors as abuse and neglect. And you put yourself at risk and will be held liable if your kid or somebody else's gets hurt by what happens at your home. I've seen parents go to prison before. So getting our kids to develop genuine motivation to change their behavior and make healthier choices requires their recognizing, right, how use conflicts with who they believe in being and what they want for themselves, right? So we also want to help them establish what kind of relationship they want to have with the substances and behavior and what they don't, right? And to set limits for themselves that they refuse to cross, related to their use, and to help them avoid hurting themselves or other people. So, that maybe they never wanted to interfere with their responsibilities or hurt other people or do pills, powders, or needles, whatever. But these are platinum questions that we want them to keep asking themselves forevermore. And to echo our ongoing curiosity theme, we're talking about peer influence, is we want to first ask them, what does peer pressure look, sound, and feel like to them, right? What is happening around them? When they're making the choices to use, what are they afraid would happen if they turned it down? We cannot assume that what we experienced at their age is what they are, right? We were never 13 or 17 in 2025, right? Then once we know what they're experiencing, then we can brainstorm strategies with them for handling situations after we ask them if they're open to our ideas. And don't role play, y'all, don't force that on them unless they want to, unless they're open to it. And then it can be really powerful. And remember that we're going to ask their input first, right? What are your ideas for handling similar situations differently? What have you seen or heard other kids doing? Let them throw you under the bus, by the way, right? And stretch the truth if they need to. Like my parents drug test me, or they read everything on my phone. My kid liked to say, my mom's like a drug dog. She can see my pupils and smell my breath across the room, right? So it's also crucial to talk about the most dangerous situations, to pre-plan those, recognizing and responding to an overdose, how to handle online predators, their ride, being intoxicated, and establish yourself as someone they can hit the red button on and call whenever they feel uncomfortable and unsafe, right? That they know how to use you as an excuse to their peers, for having to leave, and that you have a system in place for how to alert you. So with my son, Kai, he would text me an X, and I knew that meant that I needed to call and yell loudly on the phone so everybody could hear, you didn't take out the trash, so you need to come home, right? And he could blame it on me. But research shows that the more a kid plans and is equipped to steer through those stress, high pressure situations, the more likely they are to use them. And what most kids will say is that peer pressure is often in their own head. It is not kids circling them saying, do it, or you'll be a dork, or I won't be your friend. That's like the after school special version. But what they tell themselves about how others will respect them or accept them if they use, and how they won't if they don't, right? And how they want to be fun, part of the fun and the memory. So help them have ways of challenging that self-talk. So what evidence do they actually have that peers won't respect them? Or what has happened when other kids say no? What I'm told from middle school through college is that kids of all ages actually respect somebody with confidence and courage to abstain, right? So encourage them to at least run the experiment, see what happens if you try it. Teaching kids as young as possible to recognize that feeling in the gut when something is off or feels like a bad, dangerous idea. I use it every day. It's going to serve them for a lifetime. And then helping them explore the idea of what is being a good friend? What's their definition of a good friend? What do they do for each other? What do they not do to each other? Would they put each other in danger or hurt each other? Would they pressure each other to do something that somebody's uncomfortable with, right? They're going to say no, right? But then now, and so how does that fit with kids encouraging someone to engage in something that could hurt them, right? How does that fit with their idea of healthy friendship? So we want them to know how to see one and how to be one. And then recruit other people that your kid sees as cool, to echo the above messages, so to help them take it more seriously. So an older sibling, a cousin, a coach, etc. And then, it's likely that our child's being influenced in some way by media and marketing, right? Again, they're soaking in it. So since it's unfortunately getting increasingly difficult to monitor and block what our kids are exposed to, the strongest way to overpower these media forces is to harness our kids' universal adolescent values of critiquing adults and hating hypocrisy and hating being controlled and conned and manipulated. So we help them develop a critical lens on what is the agenda of these companies, right? To hook in lifetime consumers of their products as early as possible to make them mad money. And the devious strategies that they use specifically to target them, and that they hire psychologists to do it, right? And the impact that has. So activate those hypocrisy meters and highlight the ridiculousness of how advertising portrays substances and gambling and social media as magically creating the opposite of the truth, right? Like vaping and gambling make you happy, or beer gives you six-pack abs, get them pissed off enough to fight the power, right? And refuse to fall for it anymore. So ask before you tell, and use questions like these. They're, again, platinum. So I don't have time to get into the details, but I have this family mutual trust agreement that I'm giving you guys. That is it's self-explanatory when you look at it. But I want to stress that agreements are really powerful around all the things that we're talking about, particularly screens. And just a couple tips is that I highly recommend that you ask your teen to share their reflections and ideas first, right? In most of my experience, like, they will actually come up with mature and wise insights and ideas that often align with ours, right? And then they'll be bought into it because it feels like their idea, right? And we don't want to disempower that. This template is what I use with my coaching clients very impactfully. So we also want to revisit any of our agreements that we create, not just when you think they're screwing it up, but to celebrate how everybody's honoring it, right? And to check on how people are feeling about it, if it needs tweaking, if it's time to loosen the reins a little bit. Again, this outline, you'll see it when you get to it. It's pretty self-explanatory. And on my website, by the way, I've got a collection of what I think are some of the greatest screen agreements, and you can use those to also create some for yourself. So how do you know if your child is addicted? So, when any substance use or behavior is creating problems, it's officially a problem, right? It's not responsible or healthy use, but it's seen as an addiction, or what we officially call a use disorder, when it takes on these characteristics. Starting with the 4 C's of addiction. I love C's for some reason. So 1, if our kid is experiencing problems from what they're doing, but they keep on doing it anyway, right? So they got busted vaping at school, but they keep on doing it. You took the game console away, but they snuck into the bedroom and they're using it anyway, right? This tells us that this substance or activity is worth sacrificing for them. Second is loss of control. So our kiddo can't stick to the limits that they set for themselves in terms of what, how long, when, and where they'll engage in something, right? So 1 hour of gaming becomes 3, 2 hours, 2 drinks becomes 5 regularly, right? So they also can lose the ability to predict who they'll become and what kind of choices they'll make when they use. By 18, when I put alcohol in my body, I could not tell you, put it to my lips, couldn't tell you whether I was going to be the life of the party or rageful or crying or where I'd wake up or what choices I'd make. Third is that they increasingly orbit their life around using, right? So more and more of their time, thought, life space is going into planning, doing, recovering from, talking and thinking about, following social media accounts that focus on whatever this thing is, right? They begin to choose it over things that they value and their responsibilities, and they shift away from friends maybe that aren't down with what they're doing. And then fourth is that use isn't just an option among many for coping, is that it's the only tool that they have in their toolbox, right? Their default for handling tough feelings. And then tolerance is needing more and more of a substance to get the same desirable effect. And our kids can get desensitized to the dopamine, remember, right? Or the other feel-good chemicals that these activities activate. So they need faster, louder, more violent games, more graphic porn, higher gambling bets, more intense self-harm, stronger, frequent, weed use to get the same feeling from it. And then withdrawal is just they're having either a physical or an emotional response to a drug wearing off, or they're losing access to a behavior, right, that they've gotten dependent on. So this could be nausea, vomiting, body aches, tiredness, hyperactivity, for when it's a substance, or emotional withdrawals like irritability, anger, anxiousness, restlessness, or boredom with a behavioral one. So a child is diagnosed as having a mild, moderate, or severe use disorder, depending upon how many of these symptoms they display. And so if this is your kid, and you're concerned at this level, I highly encourage, it is time to seek a licensed addiction clinician or a specialist. So school counselors and social workers can be great referral sources for this. Psychologytoday.com, you can plug in your insurance and what you're looking for and who in your community, and see if your community has a referral hotline that leads you to, like we have 211 in my community that gives us referrals. So this is a slide again that you can read that summarizes what we just talked about. But for our schools, what schools can do is that we're going to apply the same concepts of using science-based education and holistic responses that actually get at why kids are doing these things in a school setting, instead of punitive measures, which will backfire. So they also need outlets, education, and support instead of those responses. And we want to provide education and support to parents, and partner with them, and partner across all the staff, so everybody's on the same page with it. And what communities can do is provide schools and parents with meaningful activities and outlets that serve, as alternatives for kids, for self-destructive behaviors, and make them affordable and accessible. Look at the Icelandic model, by the way. Iceland went from having some of the highest rates of youth use to the least in Europe, because they put all of their community sources together for alternatives, and provide, parents with events, feed them, give them swag and things that they value to get parents there, and provide them with ways to keep their kids safe, like lock boxes and alcohol locks and Narcan, and provide addiction counselors and outpatient treatment options for kids in school, or that they can access that are near school. And I want to encourage you to, one of the things that communities can do is use the TNT program that Operation Parent provides. It's an awesome, comprehensive, gives you everything that you need to get going. And so you can reach me by email, of course, if there's any questions you have for me, or on social media. I'm at Kriya Counselor on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. My website has a plethora of resources for you on substance use and screen health in particular. And I have a newsletter as well, and do video content. And then some of my favorite resources, these are on my website, and you can look at those again in detail for how to guide our kids through these things. So now, the part I'm super excited about, because it's like dessert, is that I get the honor of introducing the awesome Jessica Leahy, and I'll let her say more about herself, obviously. But what I want to say is that I've been fangirling this woman for a long time, because she wrote 2 of my very favorite books on parenting younger kids to be resilient, and then getting our kids through this addictive culture that we're dealing with right now. And she does it in a really honest way that uses tons of research and her experience as a recovering alcoholic, and written in a relatable way. She also does some fantastic Instagram videos, a whole series about this book's content. So without further ado, the amazing Jessica Leahy.
Thank you so much. What a lovely, lovely introduction. So just to give you an idea of who I am and why I'm here, I was a teacher for a very, very long time, worked in juvenile justice before that. And when I've taught every grade from like 6th to 12th, and when I was teaching middle school, I started getting a little concerned about sort of what I was seeing from the parents of my students, and intervening around, making it so the consequences didn't happen, or doing any of those things that are described through like snowplow or helicopter or Black Hawk parenting, all of those weird terms that I don't actually use. I like the term directive parenting. I found that I was getting really irritated with the parents of my students. And then I realized that I was doing the same thing myself with my own children, and sort of rendering them less competent. And it was a mess, and really messing with their motivation and their learning. And that's where the gift of failure came from. And around the time that I sold the gift of failure, I realized that this incredible opportunity I was given to be the thing I'd always wanted to be, which was an author, was really going to be torpedoed by the fact that my drinking was way out of control. I'd known that for a while. I was raised in a family with substance use disorder and come from a long line of people with substance use disorder. So my very first thought when I got sober myself was, oh my gosh, what does this mean for my own children? If I come from a long line of people with substance use disorder, does that mean that my kids are doomed? Like, I knew I never wanted to be like my parents who drank, and yet here I am. So what does that mean for my own kids? I was also teaching in a drug and alcohol rehab for adolescents, and I wanted to understand as a teacher what that meant for them. Like, what could we have done differently for my students so that they didn't end up here in a rehab? So the Addiction Inoculation was the book that I wanted and couldn't find. It's best practices for parents around substance use prevention and best practices for education around substance use prevention, teachers, counselors, administrators, all that kind of thing. So now I have the most amazing job in the world, which is to hang out with in schools with kids and teachers and parents and teach about the intersection of the gift of failure, education, learning, engagement, motivation, self-efficacy, competence, and how that intersects with substance use prevention, which, as it turns out, it is tightly interwoven with substance use prevention. The more kids feel competent, like they have actual skills, like they have this thing called self-efficacy, which is the ability to understand that the more they can go out into the world and actually do things, apply what they know, that they can have confidence based on actual skills and actual experience. The more that releases natural sources of dopamine in the brain, and the more that gives them the feeling that they really are going to be able to go out into the world as adults and become, you know, the best versions of themselves. So if we could advance to the next slide, there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about that really, the wonderful thing about the work that I got to do in addiction inoculation and gift of failure is approach it as a journalist. I had a column at the New York Times for 3 years called the Parent Teacher Conference, where I got to talk about just about everything at the intersection of parenting and education. And I get to come to these topics with a lot of objectivity and say, okay, well, they say this works or they say that works. Is that myth? Is that magical thinking? Is that us crossing our fingers and hoping it'll work? Or is that really, has that been proven to actually to be efficacious, to actually work in practice? And we know what works for substance use prevention. And now, keeping in mind, of course, that we're just one generation out from being able to look inside the human brain while it's learning, while it's using substances, while it's functioning, and actually look inside there, we're learning so much more that we did not know before. It's the reason that a lot of attitudes around, for example, alcohol are changing right now, is that we have technology and the ability to look at the brain in a way that we did not before. So if it feels like some of this is new for you, that's because it is. And that also means that it's okay if we have screwed this up in the past. I raised my eldest with a lot of mythology and magical thinking. You know, oh, if I just give them sips and let them, you know, learn moderation through modeling, that they'll somehow become like one of those moderate European drinkers. Or if I let kids over to the house and we take away everyone's keys, then that'll just keep everyone safe and that'll be great. That'll work well for everyone. That's all magical thinking. That stuff does not work. So let's talk about what does and what does work. What does not work: scared straight, just say no. As cute as it was, as much as I love the ad, this is your brain on drugs. It's dramatic. And it resides in my memory for a reason, because it was kind of a cool ad, but it's not a great explanation of what does work, because it's an egg in a frying pan. Giving kids really good information does work, and we'll get to that in just a second. We also know that that sort of moderate European drinker thing, as I mentioned, that's a myth. This is actually where I get the most pushback. People really want to believe this is true. And there's a couple of problems with this myth. And number one being that according to the World Health Organization, Europe, the European Union as a whole, the European region as a whole, has the highest levels of disease and death attributable to alcohol. So holding European moderation up as the end all be all is probably not the way to go, mainly because it's generally speaking not true. But just as the European region isn't a monolith, and just as the United States isn't a monolith, there are variations in there in terms of, like, some countries do this and some countries do that. And some countries have a community norm of, falling over drunk is not cool, whereas other ones, it's totally normal to see people falling over drunk at home. But as a whole, the European Union has the highest rates of disease and death attributable to alcohol. And as I said, maybe not the best place to hold up as the end all be all. The other problem is that it's parents that have a consistent and clear message of no, not until your brain is done developing. You could say no, and not until it's legal for you, or you could say no, not until you're of age. And the problem is, as was brought up earlier, is that teenagers aren't big fans of the just because messaging. So I, with my own kids, talk about not until your brain is done developing, and your brain's not done developing until the early to mid 20s. Drinking during adolescence is a very different thing than drinking in adulthood. When the brain is as plastic as it is during adolescence, it's the second of two highly sensitive periods of development in the brain. The first is 0 to 2. The second is puberty until the end of, the early to mid 20s. It's just much more dangerous. Adding anything to the brain, any addictive substance to the brain, anything that alters the chemistry of the brain, anything that alters what we call homeostasis to the neurotransmitters and the systems in our brain. And if you want to understand more about that, Anna Lemke's book, Dopamine Nation, is a beautiful explainer on dopamine and the dopamine cycle in the brain. We want to keep that as even keeled as possible throughout adolescence. And, in the addiction inoculation, there's lots of examples of what individual drugs can do to the brain over time. What does work is starting prevention really, really young. It starts in pre-K and kindergarten. It's not talking to pre-K kids about crystal methamphetamine, but it is talking to them about why we don't swallow toothpaste and we spit it out. Why, if we see something on the floor that looks like candy, that we talk to an adult, because it could be, a medicine, because some medicines look like candy. It could be we talk to them a little bit about why we never, ever take drugs, prescription drugs that don't have our name on the label. And you can make that fun for little kids in ways that I talk about in the addiction inoculation. There are scripts, there are explainers all the way up from pre-K and kindergarten all the way through college about what kids can handle developmentally and the ways they learn best during that developmental phase. So with a really little kid, you could do like letter finding. Can you find the letters of mommy's name on this prescription bottle? And why do you think mommy's name is even on that bottle in the first place? So be developmentally appropriate, but start young. If you're waiting until middle school or high school, you're waiting until too late. But if you haven't started and your kids are in middle school or high school, start now. Now is the very best time to start talking about substance use prevention in kids. And as I said, there are lots and lots of scripts in the book to talk about the way things go along the way and how you can be developmentally appropriate. We also know that the best education-based, the best school-based, and actually they're home and school-based substance use prevention programs integrate these lessons about our bodies and what goes inside and what doesn't go inside of our bodies, and with things like standing up for ourselves and self-advocating and having self-efficacy and refusal skills and all of these other parts of social emotional learning and having good relationships with other people and being able to talk to people about what we need. That's a big part of really good education programs as well. understanding that delay is the name of the game. The older a kid is when they start using substances, the lower their lifelong risk of developing substance use disorder. So in other words, to turn it the other way around, the younger a kid is when they try their first substance, the higher their lifelong risk of developing substance use disorder. And there's lots of reasons for that we don't have time to go into. But essentially, if we can help them understand that, understand how their brain works, understand that drugs and alcohol are much more dangerous in their brain while it's going through all of this incredibly unbelievable reconstruction and development. It's a magical, amazing time in the adolescent brain, knowing that we trust them to make some good decisions, but in order to make good decisions, they have to have all of the information at their fingertips. So understanding, for example, if they're offered alcohol in 8th grade, and the person says to them, well, it's no big deal, everybody does it, but they know that's not true, that only 24.7% of 8th graders report having had a sip of alcohol by the end of 8th grade. Then they know that that's just not true. And knowing that it's not nothing, that it's not, no big deal. It is a big deal because it does do more damage in the adolescent brain than it does in the adult brain. And that's short-term and long-term damage. Parents with a consistent, clear message of no, not until your brain is done developing, because I love you and I want your brain to make it into adulthood with all of its faculties intact, with the most potential for what you can be. And by the way, part of that information that they need, as was discussed before, is information around their genetic risk. My kids are at elevated risk for substance use disorder because of their genetics. And no, it's not just one little gene that you could flick out of there. It's a very complicated picture, the genetic picture for substance use disorder. But in order for my kids to make really good decisions, they have to know that their risk for developing substance use disorder is higher because of me and because of my husband. My husband's family also has substance use disorder throughout. So understanding that is a really important part of that medical picture. Just as you would share with them their elevated risk for diabetes or stroke or heart attack or hypercholesterolemia, high cholesterol. These are really important pieces of information. Your kid needs to make decisions about what they eat, what they take, what they use. All of these things are part of their fuller medical picture and part of helping them make good decisions, letting them know that we trust them to make those good decisions and that we will be there for them if they make poor decisions. And we'll talk with them, not about judgment, not about guilt, not about shame, but about making better decisions next time. We will come, we will help them, we will give them a ride home. And when they're ready, we'll talk about what went wrong, what they learned, and how they can do better next time. These kids who have that kind of connection with their parents, kids who have trust in their parents, kids who feel like they can come to their parents and they won't be judged or shamed or lectured to, are far more likely to have really good connection and communication with their parents. And here's the thing. I know this is really scary. I know substance use prevention is a scary topic. So is talking to them about sex. So is talking to them about porn. So is talking to them about all kinds of other things that are just oogie. But the more we talk about oogie topics, the easier they become. And in the questions, there was a question about resources for the teens as opposed to just resources for parents. And I want to say the reason I have not written a book that is a resource just for teens is because there's a fantastic one already out there. It's called High. It's by David and Nick Sheff. Maybe you know them as the father and son in Beautiful Boy, whether it's the movie or the book. Even my students at the rehab loved this book. It's written for teenagers. It doesn't talk down to them. It's really, really well written and is an appealing book. Don't get your parents stink all over it, though. Just leave it someplace where they might find it. And it can give them really, really great resources. And I just want to add in terms of screens, because this comes up all the time. My favorite screen books are Screenwise by Devorah Heitner and Growing Up in Public by Devorah Heitner. This one's about social media and that kind of stuff. And this is about screens. She has a PhD in media studies and technology. She's really knows what she's doing. And finally, one last book for your information, because sleep and substance use disorder have a bi-directional effect on each other. Kids who don't get enough sleep are more likely to use substances, and kids who use substances are more likely to not get enough sleep. I want to recommend The Sleep Deprived Teen by Lisa L. Lewis. I love this book. I talk to kids about their sleep needs all the time. It is the one laugh I'm guaranteed to get when I tell them how much sleep they're supposed to be getting. They always laugh because they're getting nowhere near that amount of sleep. But when I do talk to kids in schools, it is also one of the topics they want to address. They really do know they need more sleep, and they want to talk about how to get it. So I'm just really grateful you're all here. If you're ever worried about whether or not you're a good enough parent, know that the fact that you show up here to learn how to be better, the evidence would point to yes. It's, learning how to, and not just for our sake, but modeling for our kids that we do the best we can with the information that we have. And if we learn how to do better, we do a mea culpa and show them that we're willing to try to do better. That's all we could ever hope for our kids. And modeling that for them is going to be one of the best ways to convey that. So thank you, Michelle, for having me here. This is an incredible privilege for me. It's a wonderful distraction from, just banging my head against the wall and shouting out into the void about substance use prevention, because it's lovely to find a place where people are willing to talk.
That you could join us, Jess. We're so honored. We want to make sure the audience gets the chance to use this pop-up to register for both of your books. As a parent, as a preventionalist, I would really encourage you to add both of these books to your library. Jess is a wonderful writer, and I just felt so honored to read them. And I remembered one thing you told us is teach your kids, like, I can't do it yet. Like, that's big quotes, right? I can't do it yet. But just starting really young with something like that, showing them how much you believe in them and their ability to bounce back from things.
Well, and one of the things, there was a wonderful question about what do we do if we don't know the answer to a question our kids ask us. That's such an important thing, is to be able, I do it with my students and I do it with my own kids, which is to say, I don't know. That is a fantastic question. That's beyond my area of expertise. Let's find out together, or I'll find out and I'll report back to you. I love admitting that I don't know the answer to a question, because that humanizes us for our kids and shows them that we're willing to learn and admit that we don't know everything, because they know we don't know everything.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful thing.
So I have been a huge fan of Operation Parent for a long time. This is why this is super exciting for me to be here. But for one, their parent handbook is one of my favorite resources for talking about everything that we just did in really concise, digestible, kind of engaging ways for parents. And the webinar series, if this is your first time kind of dropping in on Operation Parent, make sure that you check out their entire library of webinars, because they have them about everything with all of the greatest experts, I think, that are in the world on these topics.
Thank you so much. We do believe and feel like our handbooks are a life-saving resource that's covering so many of the toughest topics, which you dug into deeply today, of alcohol, drugs, and vaping are just a few of the topics that are in our handbook. It's a very perfect resource for caregivers, parents, foster parents, grandparents, and we encourage you to grab one for yourself, or maybe a sample for your school or church. We want folks to know those are available in a variety of editions, including, as we mentioned here, middle and high, elementary, Spanish, and Christian, and there is bulk pricing available if you're interested in those. You mentioned our TNT program, and we would be so excited to talk with any community about our Trends in Training program. It includes evidence-based drug facts, and it gives middle schoolers practice with drug refusal skills and educating of parents all at the same time, which you showed us today how important that is. In our community, we hosted this event for middle schoolers, and over 400 attendees came on a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and we would just love to share more about how we did this and how you can make it happen in your community on a big scale or a small scale. We'd love for you to join our vibrant social media community. We are at Operation Parent on all platforms, and we are really honored by how you are sharing our social media content out in your communities. We are trying to improve the webinar program each go round. And one of the ways that we've done that recently is you can do a quick registration for our upcoming webinars. So please join us on June 3rd for Beyond Don't Do It, Real Talk about substance use, coming to you from the Stanford Reach Lab. And then on July 8th, we look forward to introducing you to Lambie. Trish Luna is the founder of Lambie Learns, and she's going to talk with you about supporting young ones through family addiction, trauma, and stress, which you also showed us how important those things are to do. So we hope you guys will stick with us on this webinar journey and take a moment and sign up for the next ones. So here we're happy to take any questions that you might have. For those of us that have older kids, one of the questions was, Kyra, where you're talking about like ambushing them with questions, to not do that. Well, sometimes you feel like even if you just start half of a question at dinner time, that might shut them down. So what are some of your strategies that you have to just, stay in there when your teens are shutting down a little bit, but you do want to get in there and talk and get to know them? And
yeah, well, that's why I think that almighty family communication equation is so crucial to say, like, to just remind them, like, well, if I don't know what's going on for you, if I don't know where your head's at with this stuff and what you're experiencing and how you feel about things and what kind of choices you're making, then my default as a parent, it's just in my DNA. And that's even with the kids, if we adopt them, it's still in our DNA to just default to worst case scenario, right? So if we don't, in the absence of information, we are going to default to like freak out, and then overprotect them. So I think, when we establish that, like, this behooves you to be open with me, because then I get up out of your grill and back off, and you have more freedom and independence.
Great point. It simmers you down as a parent.
Yeah, like, this is just like, it will benefit you to be open. But sometimes that's just us being like thinking about like how else can I ask the question? Because if I'm like, well, how was the party? And our kid says, good. I mean, they can still give us a one word answer.
Yes.
That's good. And you say, oh, well, what was good about it? What was, so we might just also have to kind of go in and be a little more creative about how we ask the question. And
could I add something to that?
Yeah.
So one of my favorite things that I did when I was writing the addiction inoculation is one of the chapters begins with a dinner that we had. I was trying to get information out of my kids to learn more about them. I was in one of those periods where they were giving me nothing. They were giving me nothing. And so one of their favorite shows at the time, this is a long time ago, was, the First We Feast Hot Ones, where Sean Evans, the host, asks guests with increasingly hot wings about, questions about themselves. And it's the spiciness of the wings that sort of knocks you off your guard and gets you to answer questions. And so my husband and I designed a Hot Ones dinner, and I made hot wings with the sauces they use on the show. I ordered them from their supplier, and we had so much fun. We talked about, I asked them questions about, their hopes and dreams and what grandparent they thought they resembled personality-wise the most, that sort of stuff. So sometimes we just have to come to them on their terms and make it doesn't have to be all, okay, now we're going to talk about drugs and alcohol. It can be a really fun part of, of conversation with family.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
Remember too, that even if they don't, I love that, Jess, I love that.
Yeah.
even if they don't like just latch on and like
Mhm.
open up into this, like, oh yes, let me tell you everything I'm thinking about this. And, this deep combo is just the fact that we asked, just the fact that we brought it up. It communicates, one, like, I care, I care about you. This is a topic that it is not taboo, and this is a norm that we're going to talk about things, but that I am available and receptive, if and when you want to talk about this stuff with me. It sticks more than we realize, even if they, roll their eyes and are like, oh,
Well, and students tell me constantly, don't tell my parents this, but I want to talk to my parents. I just don't want to talk about my French test next week or what I got on that math test. I want to talk to them about other stuff. So could we talk about that stuff too?
Yes. Oh, perfect. I have 3 ideas for the audience. One of them counts for 2, and it's bringing both of these ladies to your communities. You've had an opportunity to start to get to know them with us this afternoon, and you can see their heart and their passion for prevention. But they have a variety of just outstanding presentations that you could choose from if you'd like to invite them to your community. But you're going to have to book fast because they're both in high demand, and they've got a lot going on. So many of you were interested in the chat about having both of these ladies, Jess and Kyra, come to your community, and I encourage you to do that. Let's close out with one final question here. Jess did a great job answering several of them along the way, and then I will. Okay, how about Spanish resources? What do you recommend as some of the places that families could go to get some additional Spanish resources? And then following that, we'll close out today's webinar.
Some of my favorite resources, SAMHSA, SAMHSA online, that comes in Spanish as well. You can toggle between the two. Safe Project also comes in Spanish. There's actually a really interesting, if you Google like substance use prevention Spanish resources, there's a wonderful, at addictions.com, there's a wonderful set of resources for Latinx and Hispanic addiction resources as well. A wide variety of like mental health resources, suicide prevention resources, substance use prevention, everything you need is there.
Outstanding. Well, thank you again from the bottom of our hearts here at Operation Parent. We appreciate what you guys put together for today. Kyra, thank you so much for all your work on the webinar portion of today's presentation. And parents, what we want you to know is you've got this, even on the toughest days. You've got it every day, and Operation Parent has got you. Thanks so much for spending your afternoon with us, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Thanks, ladies.